budgeting, if we're going to take money, taxpayer money, and we're going to put these programs together, we need to help them and be so supportive that they're successful, because their success is our success.
You're hearing right there from Seattle City Council member Deborah Juarez speaking about the city's work to get more input from communities of color in the effort to reimagine public safety. An important moment in that effort is coming up this week. We're going to talk about that and a whole lot more coming up on Seattle News, Views, and Brews, your coffee break political podcast. I'm Brian Callanan. I'm a host on Seattle Channel here. The views expressed here are my own. My co-host, flying in today on his own personal Mars copter. That's Kevin Schofield of Seattle City Council Insight. Hello to you, my friend.
Hey, I'm all about the planetary drones.
I'm into it. Perseverance, baby. Let's keep it coming here. Thank you also to City Grind Espresso, our background noise sponsor for the audio podcast. They're on the first floor of Seattle City Hall, closed during the pandemic, of course, but please do support them and other small businesses online or however you can. A special shout out to our patrons who support our show on Patreon. Our Mugshot of the week this week comes from Jim. Now, he's raising the bar here, patrons. It's video of coffee actually being poured into the mug. It's a miracle. I know. He's taking it next level. Thank you so much, Jim. We're getting some great response to this. You can see this on the video version of the podcast on Converge Media. If you do want in on the fun, these mugs are awesome. We've been doing this past couple weeks here. Get your mug shot on the show, and you got to get a mug to do that, right? So become a patron of the show on Patreon at the $10 level, or truly whatever you can give. We're going to reward all of our longtime patrons with a mug at some point, but we do need your support to keep this podcast rolling. So please do that. Thanks also to Converge Media. Converge runs the video version of our podcast on their YouTube channel Wednesday nights at 6. Shout out to Andrew for helping us with editing here. Let's get things started with right here, right now. So last week of February, and the City Council is tackling what, to the untrained eye, might look like a humdrum transit funding agreement with King County Metro. But there's actually a lot to this. Voters passed Prop 1 for transit service last year. This was that 0.15% sales tax measure to reestablish the Seattle Transportation Benefit District. We've had that district in place since 2010. Voters said yes to it in 2014. It's essentially for extra transit service in the city. Kevin, there's a point about car tab fees I want to tackle in a minute. But first, this appears to be the council trying to come through for voters on this Prop 1 vote. But I keep coming back to so many people are concerned about riding buses, even as we emerge from COVID. What's this expanded service really going to look like?
Yeah, well, at this point, what the council members have said they're focusing on, and what SDOT has said it's focusing on, is maintaining on the frequent service lines, the ones that run like every 10 minutes, every 8 minutes, every 10 minutes, the kind of the workhorses of the bus system in Seattle, making sure that they can maintain that frequent service, right? So it's a supplement, it's a layer that goes on top of what Metro is already providing to make sure that goes. In the fall, so just to be clear, Metro makes bus service changes twice a year. They do it in March and they do it in September.
That's right.
So what they're going to be doing for the next couple of months is planning what they want to do for September. And the assumption is by September, hopefully more people will want to be taking buses. So where this change that's coming up, that they're just funding, and will be for March, that will sustain the frequent lines.
Mm-hmm.
By September, they really hope to start bringing back some of the other lines that have, have fallen off.
Right. And which is a COVID-dependent conversation here. But keep
we're
going.
also going to have to remember something else is going to happen this fall.
Yeah.
Which is the Northgate extension is going to open.
That's right.
So particularly
light
in
rail.
The north end, Metro is going to rejigger a whole bunch of different lines so that they feed to and from three new stations. Right. And that's going to be important change. So beyond just sort of this expansion, a lot of stuff in the north end is going to change just with more lines going east and west, less lines going north and south, because they really think of the the frequent light rail as the backbone.
Part of the system here, a big part of the system.
In the north end, and they want to get people to and from that on buses rather than carrying lots of people on buses, particularly sort of in the close-in corridor near that. Have lots of north-south lines. So a lot more is going to change when that comes out in the fall.
Yeah, I think there are so many different moving parts with this. That's a great observation there. I wanted to talk a little bit about these car tab fees, though, which now that I-976 has been overturned, the council looks like it has a little more money to play with here. So the city put aside $23.7 million, basically put that in reserve last year in the event that this legal challenge to 976 was unsuccessful. But newsflash, Tim Eyman did indeed lose that case, so the money's back in play for the city. Kevin, it sounds like we're going to have another discussion in March here about where that money should go. Is it more transit? Is it more Vision Zero priorities to reduce traffic deaths? Because those did not look good in a recent report here. What's that conversation going to be like?
Yeah, and another part of this is looking at bridge maintenance.
Yeah, right. Of course.
That's the big priority, certainly for the Transportation Committee Chair Alex Peterson.
Yep.
He wants more, and
he's
for
been
Lisa
talking
Herbold.
about that a lot. Yeah,
Lisa Herbold's been talking about that too. Not all city council members are on the same page on that, but that at least for a couple of them is going to be the main priority, because we are underinvesting by tens of millions of dollars every year in what we should be spending on bridge maintenance and major structure maintenance in the city. And so it's just creating every year that goes by a bigger and bigger backlog for that. Right. So it's going to be an interesting political discussion and policy discussion. There are these competing interests and competing priorities for spending this pot of money. And
I want this in my district. I want it in my district. Yeah, keep going.
Yeah. And this is an ongoing pot of money, right? Because, this is exercising the city council's ability independently on their own to create a vehicle license fee up to a certain amount.
Yeah.
And then we may see, they didn't build that into the renewal of the transportation benefit district,
right? Because they were unsure about 976 at the time.
But they might layer another one on top of that this coming year.
Yeah.
Right? So we might get another boost on top of that if the voters just, if that gets out there and voters decide to approve it. So we'll see what happens with that too.
Yeah, I know there's a few different ways the council can act with that, even with a council manic action, meaning without a public vote to add some of these different fees here. So we're going to be looking at that. We're going to be looking at the possibility of a public vote to increase those car tab fees. So a lot still ahead with this issue, and stay tuned for that. But Kevin, I do want to switch gears a little bit here and talk about the Black Brilliance Research Project, set to make a presentation to the council on the 26th about where money should be invested to better serve communities of color regarding public safety. Again, this is that $3 million contract awarded to King County Equity Now to figure out where $30 million in participatory budgeting funds will go. But it's not clear right yet who's going to make this presentation. The researchers have parted ways with KCEN. They say they want to align themselves with the Freedom Project, which is the fiscal sponsor for this work. Kevin, we talked about this over the past couple of weeks. This is a bit of a mess. The state auditor looking at the situation too. What are you expecting to see out of this presentation, one? And what questions do you think the council should be asking at this point?
Well, from what I'm hearing so far, it sounds like Councilmember Morales, whose committee is going to be hearing this report,
right,
has confirmed that there is going to be a report on February 26th in her committee on this. The Black Brilliance researchers, who have really been doing the grunt work on doing this project, have said that they are presenting that report on February 26th. King County Equity Now has been a little quiet. They, seem to be saying that they're going to provide a report at the end of the month.
Yeah.
So it's very unclear what their role, if any role, that they have on February 26th. Freedom Project seems to be distancing themselves from them. The researchers are already distancing themselves. So, but at the same time, the contract is with King County Equity Now.
That's right. That's right.
Right. So there are lots of shoes still to drop.
Yeah.
This may be, an octopus wearing a lot of shoes.
Yeah.
And there's going to be a lot of shoes to drop. Clearly, the state auditor's report, whenever that comes out, will be a thing. There'll be, I know I and several other reporters have public document requests into the city to kind of see the correspondence and reports that have happened behind the scenes over the last couple of months as this all developed. And I think we will start getting a bunch of those next month. Returned. And then we'll learn more about, what the process really was behind this.
Yeah. I'm thinking about what the process was and what it will be, because in talking with Councilmember Juarez this month on Council Edition, check it out on Seattle Channel, a show that just dropped a little while ago. She wants to give some grace to these different groups representing communities of color. And we talked about this last week, Kevin. Systemic racism has played a role in keeping these communities down, and the hope is to avoid the system stopping these important public safety studies from happening. So I'm just trying to figure out, looking forward here, and I know we still have a lot to go on those shoes to drop you mentioned there, but what options does the city council have at this point to really try to preserve this ideal of making sure that these voices are heard from and that these new options or possibilities for public safety are put into effect?
Yeah, and there's a couple pieces of that. One is this longstanding issue that came up last summer as they were looking for, who should be doing this research.
Right. Who's qualified to do it? Yeah.
Right. The city and the county and other organizations have underinvested in communities of color in growing the skills that they would need to be able to do this research on their own communities.
Right.
But at the same time, they're the ones with the cultural competence to really understand, of course, what questions to ask, who to ask it of, to really find out what's going on.
Yeah.
So there's a disconnect there that needs to be addressed. And if we just say, oh, we're only going to talk to the best, most rigorous UW researchers to go do this work, we'll get an answer, we'll get rigorous research, but the rigorous research may not tell us the things that we need to know. Right. They may just simply miss the right questions and miss getting input from the right people. But at the same time, the flip side of that is the people with the cultural competency who know to ask may not be able at this point, given the underinvestment in them and their in their organizations, their communities, to deliver in a way that will help the city council make important policy decisions. And that really leads to sort of the next question, which is, okay, fine. They finish this report. Maybe they get two reports. Maybe they get one for the Black Bruins researchers and one from King County Equity Now. Right. The goal of this was pre-work to get everybody ready to do a participatory budgeting exercise. Right. Now, who's going to run them?
Yeah.
Well, I mean,
it could be the Equitable Communities Initiative that the mayor's working on. I know there's possibly some teamwork going on there, and maybe that's a route for this to go forward. I'm just thinking between the mayor and the council, they want to try to figure out some way to come through on this promise, like you say.
Yeah, but again, it's not just the research. The research was to inform this other big thing,
investment. Yeah,
it was $3 million to do research so that we could figure out how to best spend $30 million.
That's right,
or $60 million if you include the Equitable Communities Initiative from the mayor's office. Right? Yeah, and you're right; they are hopefully talking to each other now. At least King County Equity Now seems to be talking to them. And so, if we want to spend the $60 million, well, we're going to get some information from these reports on it. Yeah. But who takes that forward? Who really figures out what is this process? And we're already at the end of February. Right. And the tentative schedule that the preliminary report from the Black Bruins researchers said was, we're going to be voting on projects in July. Right. Well, I mean, first of all, the amount of work that would have to be done between now and July just to assemble proposals that people could vote on. Yeah. But then, they wanted every resident of the city 10 years old and older to be able to vote for this. Yep. There is no database to that set of people. Right. Yeah. And there is certainly no voting system in place that would allow, secure, accurate, reliable voting for that set of people. Right. And, the voting system alone would probably take at least a year to put together. Right. That's so is it going to happen this summer? Smart Vegas money says no. Yeah. And yet they have $60 million in this year's budget to spend. That's right. So they're going to have a hard decision to figure out about how do we decide how to spend this? Right. So much urgency, of course, following the protests of last year that I think really spilled over into this project here. It's difficult to see these roadblocks coming up here, but I think that's exactly what they're dealing with here. And the immediate one is, if we're committed to participatory budgeting, and maybe we do it in December, since they already have the budget allocated, still, who's going to run it? Yeah. Right. Who's going to make these decisions about what kind of voting system we use? Who gets to vote? Yeah. What are the process? What's the process for vetting projects that people could vote on? Sure. Right? All of that stuff. Yeah. None of that organization is assembled, and the city council first is going to have to decide who they want to task with figuring out really, in detail how to do that, not just at a high level. Right. Well, we're going to continue our public safety conversation here with our next segment. Now, hear this.
So we have had 2 fatal police shootings in Seattle this month. February 9th in the Central District, a man who police believe shot 2 other people before officers shot and killed him. And then the most recent one on the Seattle waterfront, February 16th, with a man who had a kitchen knife. He was reportedly cutting himself. Officers tried to use less than lethal force, were not successful, and shot and killed this man. Kevin did an interview with the director of the Office of Police Accountability about this second shooting and focused on what officers should do when a knife is involved with a person they encounter. As Seattle reimagines public safety, Andrew Meyerberg says there has to be a better way to deal with these cases, and he wants Seattle to try to set a new example. Let's listen.
Our goal, right, is to have 0 shooting deaths with knife cases. 0, right? That should be the goal. And I think that's kind of where Chief Diaz's head is at right now. I know Lisa Judge has had preliminary conversations with him. I've spoken to the compliance chief coordinator of compliance. Like, if there's no way to do it, there should be a way. And I think Seattle tends to innovate in these areas. All criticism aside, because people I think will always criticize departments across the country, sometimes for good reason, about their response to incidents. Seattle generally does innovate in these areas, and I think this is another area where they could innovate in.
And that is just a piece of this interview here. The full transcript on Seattle City Council Insight. And Kevin, very well done here. A few things to mention at this point. This was a tragic situation, clearly involving someone who was definitely having some problems, even telling officers to kill him as he approached. That's on the body cam video there. Also, this case is still under investigation. Important to point that out too. But Kevin, I hear in your interview that Director Meyerberg wants to stop these cases from happening. Even before he finishes the report on this, he wants to figure out maybe some new training for the SPD. This is such a complex issue.
Yeah, there are a bunch of different pieces of this, and we just have to say up front, this is just an incredible tragedy. Both of these events are incredible,
of course,
tragedies in our community, and we have a lot of soul searching that we have to do to figure out, at every level of this, how do we work, upstream from these to prevent people from ending up in these situations in the first place. Look really hard at all the things that law enforcement does in these situations to do it. I spent a lot of time at the beginning of that interview talking with Director Meyerberg around just simply the issues that really drive, more than anything else, the immediate response of the question of whether police officers have time, distance, shielding.
That's right. Those are the 3 keys for them.
This more evident for a gun, but they're also evident for a knife. So the difference between a person, in crisis or not in crisis even, who is 100 feet away sitting somewhere versus somewhere who's close up, walking, heading very quickly, either towards the police officers or towards other innocent bystanders, right? And the training for the police officers is, when you find yourself in the situation, somebody with a knife, what you want to be able to do is get the team together and make a plan. And if you have time and distance, you can do that.
Right. But that's not always the case.
You don't. So one of the first questions is, as we evaluate, the body cam video that we've seen, which is just heartbreaking and tragic and so disturbing to watch. And it happened really, really fast. Did they have the time to get the team together and make a plan? They certainly didn't have time to get, a crisis negotiator there.
That didn't. Right? There was no time for that.
But did they have the time to try to de-escalate it? That is going to be a really tough question that they have to ask. So, a lot of what, to come back to the question you asked, what Director Meyerberg wants to push forward with is to, pick up some of these situations, right? Some of these scenarios, because there have been more knife incidents lately. And make sure that at the very least, because training is super hard right now. Training in the time of COVID is super hard. At least maybe at some of the roll call meetings, something like that, walk through some of these videos and talk about, here are some of the things, let's at least talk about the approaches that we take to this. He also raised a couple of other interesting issues, one of which is, as we've seen a lot of attrition.
They don't have the experienced officers around.
We have less experienced officers out there. And so perhaps when there is someone armed with a knife, it should be required that a sergeant respond to the scene. Just to make sure that there is a seasoned officer there who can really focus on, do we have the time, distance, and shielding? Can we make the plan?
Yeah.
Can we get the team together and do the right thing?
It happens with malicious harassment. Why not do it for knife calls? Yeah.
Yeah. I think there's a lot of legitimacy to that.
Yeah.
So, that's where he and the Inspector General for Public Safety, Lisa Judge, seem to be heading with this.
Yeah.
They want to look at what are the things, obviously there's more recommendations they can do long term, but in the short term, is there something we can do now that may just improve this situation?
Yeah, and let me jump in because I think he has made the point a few different times on a few different issues too, that no agency really does this well. I mean, he's done a lot of the research around the country, and he's also looked into these different options like Cahoots, that situation down in Eugene where it's less of a police intervention, it's more of an outreach, a social outreach there. He said in this situation, I know we're all trying to reimagine police in Seattle here, but in this situation, Cahoots wouldn't have worked. That kind of social outreach bit would not have worked. This was a situation that's moving very quickly here, and it involves someone with a deadly weapon. And I think that as we reimagine that, and as our city leaders reimagine that, I think there has to be that realization there that there is a police presence that in some cases is needed. And that's a big challenge here too.
Yeah, that's a tough conversation we're going to have if we go after a civilian crisis intervention group,
right?
Which could respond to people in crisis, and there's going to be a lot of situations where that would work really, really well.
Yeah.
But there will be some where we don't send out that group.
Yeah.
And Director Meyerberg was pretty clear that in a situation where there is a man armed with a knife or a gun, where it's not safe to send out, it's arguably not safe to send police officers out to it.
Yeah,
that's their job to go to it.
Sure.
Not safe to send out civilians.
Yes.
Right, to that they're not going to be sent out. That's not something that even the Cahoots group in Eugene, Oregon would respond to.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So that doesn't. That isn't an escape hatch that gets us away from trying to figure out what the protocols are going to be and what the procedures and policies and the training should be for police officers for dealing with these tough situations.
Yeah. There's a lot still ahead on that story, and I know we're going to be following up on that one. I'm going to switch gears again with you here, though, Kevin, and update a story we brought you last week, everyone. A couple of QFC stores are closing down in April here in Seattle in the wake of the city council's decision to require a $4 an hour pay raise for workers at the major grocery chains, the hazard pay ordinance, as it's been called. The stores are saying you're making it really difficult for these stores, which were already having some challenges, apparently, so it's time to shut them down. They also are filing some legal challenges against the city, a number of industry groups doing this. Last week, the city fired back. There's this motion to dismiss the case brought by the United Grocery Workers. Council members and the mayor say the stores are acting like bullies by closing down the stores and with the lawsuits, etc. So here we go. Let's try to tackle the legal stuff here first, Kevin. Does the city have good ground to stand on with this motion to dismiss the lawsuit? Let's break this down again.
Well, the lawsuit isn't one challenge to it.
Right,
it's 4 or 5 different challenges.
That's right,
to
multiple
it.
challenges.
And the plaintiffs' challenges, probably the strongest one they have, at least from me looking at, I'm not a lawyer, but just from the legal scholarly stuff that I've done, just looking at this, probably the strongest case they have is around the equal protection aspect of this, which is
other businesses.
This is something they've done for groceries, but they haven't done it for department stores. They haven't done it for drugstores. They haven't done it for banks. They haven't done it for other essential workers. So, so it's going to cost these companies a bunch of money, but not these other companies, some of which they compete with. Right.
Yep.
And so, how is that, fair?
Yeah. How's that going to work?
Right. I think that is a legitimate challenge. There's a big portion of it is around the interpretation of the National Labor Relations Act and whether it preempts this kind of literally interference in labor negotiations between a company and the union representing its employees.
Because they're having talks about these different health measures they're taking in stores.
Yeah, and what the plaintiff said was in their argument was, we were having ongoing negotiations around what the package should be around, COVID, response. Should it be some amount of money and improved health benefits? Or should it just be a bunch of money? Or should it just be all improved health benefits?
Right.
Which is a back and forth about what can the company afford to spend in addition, and what's most important to the employees as represented by their union. And the city just dropped in, just parachuted in the middle of that and said, it's $4 an hour.
Right. Which people would not necessarily spend on their health. You know, I think that's a piece of this conversation too. That's a really interesting twist on this.
Oh yeah. And right. So and that's part of the legal argument too, because the city has justified their intervention in this by saying, you know, we have the right to, and there's lots of case law backing this up, in emergencies like the COVID emergency, to protect public health and safety.
That's right.
And so we have the right to come in and enact measures that will improve public health.
Yes.
But there's nothing here that actually forces those grocery store employees to spend that extra $4 an hour on anything that relates to public health.
Yeah.
Right. So they can't you know, they have to show the, you know, at the very least, the rational basis that they have for this and connect the dots to what they actually did in this legislation. And that's a pretty tenuous kind of connection there.
Right.
So that's the kind of legal arguments going back and forth. This is a tough area, like the National Labor Relations Act stuff. There's decades of case law around this stuff, and it's all arcane stuff. And so it's really hard. It's hard to say how the district court judge is going to rule on this. It will almost certainly get appealed up to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, who, you know, will absolutely review it. And, you know, it's hard to say what they're going to say. So March 18th, there's going to be oral arguments. I assume it's going to include this motion to dismiss as well. And you know, because the plaintiffs have asked for a preliminary injunction.
Yes.
And now the defendants, the city, has asked for a motion to dismiss.
Right.
So I expect they will talk about all of that on March 18th, and it'll be a couple hours to go through all that.
Sure.
And then we'll see how quickly the judge decides.
Yeah. There's a ton still ahead on this story. I know it affects a lot of us and a lot of cities around the country right now that are considering this, a number of them on the West Coast. All right, we're going to move on to our final segment. What's next? All right, so that rustling sound you're hearing in the distance, where is that there? Yeah, that's your democracy voucher coming in the mail, folks. Just got mine recently. Folks, this is how you support candidates who qualify for this program, for the citywide election. You can turn them in virtually too, so don't throw this away when it comes in the mail. Some important stuff coming there. But Kevin, if I may, I'm going to shift gears, if I could, to the ever-present COVID crisis. The city of Seattle working on getting a mass vaccination site open at Lumen Field in the month of March. Your thoughts on how this is going to work? I'm sure there's going to be some sort of federal help involved here, but again, that question of supply of the vaccine is hanging over all of this. What do we got here?
Yeah, so for funding, the good news is, and this is something that the council has been spending a lot of time, and the city budget office has been spending a lot of time looking at, is FEMA. It looks to be changing their reimbursement rules. They have been saying we will reimburse 70% of the cost of things that local governments have to spend on COVID response.
Got it.
They're looking up to that to 100%, which is great news for the city. That will help them tremendously on this. And that allows them to spend the money to go build out a Lumen Field, the big, you know, mass vaccination site. But again, with everything else that's going on right now, the big issue is, are we going to have vaccines?
Yeah.
And the Biden administration is now saying that they're hoping to get from about the 1.5 million doses that are going out a week right now to 4.5 million in the next few weeks, which would be great. That'll make a huge difference. It'll still take us a long time at that rate to get to, 300 million people vaccinated. It's actually going through the state.
Okay, right.
But the city
is a partner.
It is officially certified to be able to deliver vaccines itself.
Yes.
So it doesn't have to, it can organize its own thing separate from what the county or the state or FEMA are doing, because they're all organizing vaccination sites and pop-up sites and all that as well. And obviously the city is very concerned about sort of equitable distribution.
Just passed a resolution on that last week. The council did.
And they had last week they had a whole bunch of hearings talking about the issues around that and where they're seeing disparities right now. So they want to make sure that gets addressed right. And some of the issues around that are going to be things like language, right? For people who are not native English speakers. But, COVID doesn't care what language you speak. Right. So how do we get information out to everybody
I wanted to celebrate some of the culture of our city, if I might here, Kevin, as we transition to the very important treat segment of our podcast. What do you have with your coffee here? So may I present to you, again, we only have a little crumb of it left here. I don't know if I get that scoping on the top here. So what you're looking at here, my friend, is something called ambasha. It's an Ethiopian bread. My daughter made this. Another one of these stovetop kind of creations here, generally made for celebrations. But of course, every week with you is a celebration, Kevin. I should point that out, folks. But it's one of those spiced breads. So we're talking about some cardamom and ginger in here. And I know you're a big sourdough guy, but something about these slightly sweeter breads. I mean, I don't even need any butter on this thing. You know what I mean? Some of those breads that have that sweetness to it are really something.
Yeah, I was looking at some recipes lately, including some interesting spiced bread recipes, you don't need any spread on them or any butter on them because they're tasty, but they also have like a pound of butter in them.
Well, there's that. Good for you too. I mean, you got to have some goodness with the with the ambasha.
It's one of those things where 20 years from now we're going to discover that butter is the healthiest thing you could ever eat.
Indeed. I can't wait for that to come out.
I'm living for that day. I'm living for that because it's definitely not today.
No, not today. Thank you, Kevin, once again for sharing all of your insights with me, sir.
And thank you, Brian.
All right. And thanks to all of our patrons, too. Please do support us on Patreon. If you can do it at the $10 a month level, you can get your own coffee mug sent out to you pronto. A few people have been doing that. Thanks to everybody always for listening to Seattle News, Views, and Brews, where you can always find out what's brewing in local politics. Subscribe on iTunes, Spotify, wherever you listen. And again, please support us on Patreon if you like what you're hearing. We really do need your help to keep this podcast rolling. Thanks also for watching on Converge Media, too. We'll see you next time.
Seattle News, Views, and Brews is an independent production of Callanan Media Services. Copyright 2021.